there. I'm here to talk with you about a student, Zach Jones, who I chose for the secondary assessment module. Zach is an 8th grade student. He's 13 years old, and he is identified under the disability category of other health impaired. Zach was diagnosed with ADHD in 2015, and so he was his disability category actually changed from speech language impairment to OHI because of that. Zach does not receive any medication currently, and he never has, according to my knowledge. So we will just jump right in. Zach was initially referred for testing in 2011 when he was in pre-K. And at that point, it was just a speech language impairment, and he only received speech services. Then he went to kindergarten, and that was in 2012, and they decided that he needed to be placed, he needed an IEP, and he needed to be pulled out for literacy and math. And so he was. And then he was up for a 3-year reevaluation in 2015, and that's when he was diagnosed with ADHD. They decided to change his disability category and identify him under OHI. And so the 2015 reeval is the data that we're going to be looking at. He's actually due for a reeval next month. And so the status is pretty old, but it doesn't really reflect his current level of functioning. But nonetheless, that's what we're going to look at. Okay, so Zach was given the Reynolds intellectual assessment, and this test just measures your general intelligence, and the scores are obtained by comparing students' scores with same age peers, and the average IQ range is from 90 to 109. There are verbal and nonverbal subtests within this assessment. The first verbal subtest that I'm going to discuss is called Guess What? And examinees are given 2 to 4 clues, and they have to figure out the object or the concept that's being described based on the clues that the examiner gave them. Verbal reasoning. Examinees listen to a propositional statement that essentially forms a verbal analogy. And so they're given part of it by the examiner, and then the examinee has to respond with 1 or 2 words. So maybe the examiner says something like go to, and the student would say bed. So go to bed is the statement that would be made. Nonverbal tests, one is called an odd item out, and the examinee is presented with picture cards that contain 5 to 7 pictures, and they have to determine which one does not belong. And then what's missing is another nonverbal test, and they're given a picture, they're shown a picture with some key elements missing, and they have to determine what's missing from that picture. So say there is ingredients and a spoon and an oven, but you're missing the bowl that you've got to mix all that in. So the student would say something like, well, there's nothing to mix all that in, so we need a bowl. That's how they test what's missing in this test, their nonverbal reasoning. On the subtest, the average range is 50. On Guess What, Zach got a 45. In verbal reasoning, he got a 41. In odd item out, he got a 37, and what's missing, he got a 45. So he's below average on all of those, and he's well below average on the odd odd item out, which is he scored a 37. Then the BASC was given. This is a system used to assess behavior. It's a rating scale that both the teachers and the parents rate the student. So clinically significant range suggests that there's a significant high level of maladjustment. Scores that are in the at-risk range may identify a significant problem that needs treatment, or it just may identify a potential problem that needs to be monitored pretty closely. So the different subtests within the BASC is hyperactivity. He was at risk for both the teacher and the parent. Aggression, he is average for both. Conduct problems, average for both. And so his composite was average. Anxiety, he was average for the teacher, clinically significant for the parent. Depression, average for both, and so his composite was average. Learning problems, only the teacher rates this one. He was average. Attention problems, at risk from the teacher, and average for parents. His composite was at risk. Atypicality, at risk for both teacher and parent, and withdrawal, he was average, and the composite was average for that. Adaptability, average for both. Social skills, average for both. Leadership, at risk for the teacher, average for the parent. Study skills, at risk for the teacher, excuse me, average for the parent. Functional communication, at risk for teacher, average for parents. And daily living skills, the parents rated him as average. They're the only ones that rate that one. He had a composite. In adaptive skills, he was at risk for the teacher, and he was average for the parents. Then he was given the Woodcock-Johnson Test of Achievement. This is an assessment that tests cognitive abilities and achievement. This assessment was given in the area of reading and written expression. The subtests that were given were letter word ID. This measures his decoding skills. Reading fluency just measures the speed and accuracy in which he reads. Passage comprehension. This test is pretty complex, and it just measures the ability to produce the mental representations provided by text during the process of reading. So just what did they remember? What is their comprehension of the text? Writing sample, it requires retrieval of word meanings and syntactic information. So syntax is just how you put words together to form a sentence. So that's what writing samples test. Then he has calculation that was tested. This measures the student's ability to perform paper pencil math computations. And math fluency tests the student's ability to solve simple math, addition, subtraction, and multiplication facts quickly. On this actual subtest, they're only given 3 minutes to complete some math facts. Applied problems test measures the student's ability to solve simple addition, subtraction, and multiplication facts as well. So on the letter word ID, the standard score he was given was 110, and that is a grade equivalency of 3.7. Reading fluency scaled score was a 94, 2.4 grade equivalency. Passage comprehension, he had a scaled score of 99 and a 2.8 grade equivalency. Writing samples was a 106 standard score and a 3.5 grade equivalency. Calculation, a standard score of 99 and a 2.6 grade equivalency. Math fluency, 93 with a grade equivalency of 2.3. Applied problems is 89 with a grade equivalency of 2.0. Some recommended adaptive behavior skills. that were written for Zach were communication skills, making sure that he can comprehend typical verbal communication, and that he can provide relevant verbal responses. That was actually tested in his Reynolds assessment. Self-care, realize the importance of taking care of yourself. Home living, uses verbal skills to maintain positive relationships with others. Social, uses the verbal skills to maintain positive relationships and respond appropriately to typical physical exchanges with others. Community use, he makes appropriate use of his free time. Self-direction, he's able to complete tasks or assignments during the time provided. Health and safety, we want him to be able to demonstrate a knowledge of requirements for personal safety. Leisure, he chooses recreational activities, self-initiates a variety of recreational interests, and he takes turns when appropriate. So according to Zach's testing data, which was in 2015, based on that data alone, which does not represent his current level, is reading instruction on the 3rd grade level. Word recognition strategies would help Zach build automatic sight word recognition. Things like word walls and word banks and flashcards would really help Zach. And then it would also help him to be able to read independently at a higher level. His reading comprehension, he really struggles with decoding. In syllabication, it's very hard for him to break words apart, and it's hard for him to identify those individual phonemes in order to decode words. So when Zach completes a passage, it's good for a teacher to go over and review the words that he missed. Seeing those words, hearing those words, and seeing them at the same time will help with his decoding and sight word recognition. In math, based on his data, it would be best if he were presented with middle 4th grade. He's in the middle of 4th grade range, and those would show the greatest gains for Zach according to that testing data. As a strategy, it may be good to help Zach draw pictures or diagrams of word problems before he tries to represent them with numbers. Computer-assisted instructions will help, will aid in instruction and allow Zach to progress at his own pace and receive immediate error correction. It would also be beneficial if Zach were given step-by-step instructions in math. Math is his weaker area, and so when he's presented with problems that require several steps, Zach can get confused. Zach was, and I know this because Zach was my student when he was at Southwest in 6th grade. It's best to decompose numbers, to break them apart when he's working with multi-digits. So it's best to kind of break those down and to use different websites and computer software to help build basic math fluency. Zach was also tested, was also given a speech language evaluation. He was given the clinical evaluation of language fundamentals, 5th edition. This assessment evaluates expressive and receptive language. The subscores range from 7 to 13, and those are considered normal functioning range, 7 to 13. So, sentence comprehension, Zach received a scaled score of 6. so that's below the normal functioning range, and a percentile rank of 9. Linguistic concepts, scaled score of 6, so below normal, and a percentile rank of 9. Word structure, he received a 9, so he's within that normal range, and a percentile rank of 37. Word classes, a scaled score of 8, a percentile rank of 25. Following directions, scaled score of 7, percentile rank of 16. Formulating sentences, a scaled score of 7, and a percentile rank of 16. Recalling sentences, a scaled score of 7, and a percentile rank of 16. So the results from that assessment indicate that Zach's overall language is in the average to mild range. So some of those scores were in the normal functioning, and then some were just a little bit below. So he received some 6s, and 7 is the minimum score you can get to be normal functioning. He was also given the test of language development, a primary 4th edition. This is designed to assess children's receptive and expressive spoken language. So this test consists of 6 core subtests. So you've got picture vocabulary, relational vocabulary, oral vocabulary, syntactic understanding, sentence imitation, and morphological completion. So in listening, he received an index score of 97 and a percentile ranking of 42. Organizing was an 80, percentile rank was 9. Speaking index was 103, percentile ranking was 58. Grammar was an 86 with percentile ranking of 18. Semantics was 100, index score and 50, percentile ranking. Spoken language was 92, index and 30 percentile. He was in the 30th percentile. His strengths for that test were receptive picture vocabulary and vocabulary, and then his needs were comparing and contrasting, expressive vocabulary, so being able to get across what he needs to say, and memory and organizing information. And that may have a lot to do with his ADHD. Then he was given an articulation test, the Goldman-Bristow test of articulation. It assesses 23 phonemes produced in the initial, medial, and final position of words and sentences, and 12 consonant blends. So on this test, he received 0 errors. So his articulation skills are within normal limits for his age. So he was given that OT evaluation in 2015, and based on those scores, he is actually dismissed from OT. So he does not receive any OT services anymore, but I felt like that needed to be included in this module because he was serviced in speech, and that's initially what he started out as, was the speech language impairment. So I just thought that that was important to include that in this assessment. He also received an OT evaluation in 2015. So in 2015, he received a full comprehensive evaluation, psych evaluation, a speech language evaluation, which ultimately led him in being dismissed from speech. And then when he was also given an OT evaluation, he had received occupational therapy since kindergarten. And so he was also given that evaluation in 2015. And I'll just go ahead and say that based on all the evaluation data from his OT evaluation, he was also dismissed from OT. So Zach does not receive any OT or speech language services anymore. He is strictly resource math and literacy and no related services. So on his OT, he was given the BOT 2, And this is a test that that uses engaging in goal-directed activities. So he's asked to do something related to motor skills, and he has to perform that skill. So there were 4 different subtests that they gave Zachary. The first one was called fine motor precision, and this consists of activities that require precise control of finger and hand movement. He had to draw 5 items. He had to do one paper folding activity, and he had to do one cutting activity. And he was scored based on those results, and we'll get to those in just a minute. And then he had fine motor integration, and this requires the examinee to produce drawings of various geometric shapes that range in complexity from a circle to overlapping pencils. And this measures the ability to integrate visual stimuli with motor control. Another subtest is called manual dexterity. So uses goal-directed activities that involve reaching, grasping of small objects. By including speed, because this is a timed activity, that's how they come up with a score for that. And then there's upper limb coordination, which consists of activities designed to measure visual tracking with coordinated arm and hand movements. So on his fine motor precision, he got a scale score of 8, which put him below average. Then for his fine motor integration, he got a scaled score of 13, which put him at average. And then on his manual dexterity, he got a scale score of 16, which put him at average. And then upper limb coordination put him at above average. It is believed that, it stated in his data that it's believed that the assessment reflects Zach's true abilities in those areas. He was then given the VMI, the Visual Motor Integration Skills Assessment. And then this is where students have to draw geometric designs such as lines, circles, and squares, and then the drawings get more complex as the test goes on. So on the VMI, he had a raw score of 15, and he was in the 25th percentile. For his visual perception, he received a raw score of 13, and he was in the 3rd percentile. And in motor coordination, he received a 12, and he was in the 4th percentile. These scores are pretty low, but I will say that it was noted in his data report that the examiner felt like he was hurrying through the test items, especially on the visual perception and the motor coordination. And it's noted that they do not believe that this assessment reflects Zach's true abilities. In handwriting, he was assessed in handwriting. They used the test of handwriting skills, the THS. This just assesses how a child writes their letters, words, sentences, and numbers, either spontaneously or from dictation or from copying. It also measures speed at which the letters are written. So there are subtests, but it doesn't name the subtests. It didn't name them in his report. So it just said subtest 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And I believe, there were 10 subtests that were given. So subtest 1, he was in the 50th percentile. Subtest 2, 9th percentile. Test 3, 9th percentile. Test 4, 37th percentile. Test 5, 2nd percentile. Test 6, 9th percentile. Test 7, 16th percentile. Test 8, 16th percentile. Test 9, 9th percentile. And test 10. He was in the 16th percentile. So, according to this test, he didn't demonstrate any qualifying scores except for in one area, and that was writing numbers. And the only thing that was noted was that he demonstrated a reversal on the number 7. So he did well on that test. So, like I had told you before, he was dismissed. He didn't, they felt like he didn't indicate any, that he was behind any in fine motor skills or visual perception or motor integration. So they did dismiss Zach from OT at that point. So that's all I have on Zach's evaluation. Thank you.